All right, listeners, today we're going to take a deep dive into how to absolutely crush the IELTS listening section. Like, seriously crush it. We're talking band 9.
Ambitious. I like it.
We're going way beyond just those typical practice tests you see everywhere.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into some cool resources that'll hopefully help you unlock that, like, expert user level of listening.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
To not just do well, but to really become a master listener.
Exactly. So where do we even begin with this whole expert user thing?
Well, first off, got to understand how this test is structured.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, what are we actually dealing with here?
Exactly. So the IELTS listening test, it's got a very specific structure, right? It starts off kind of easy with basic conversations in section 1.
Right.
Then as you go through the sections, it gets tougher and tougher. By the time you hit section 4, you're dealing with like full-on academic lectures.
Oh, yeah. I was looking at the Cambridge IELTS book 16, actually, this one. And you can see how they, like, slowly crank up the difficulty. Like, section 1 starts with just filling in basic details about those children's engineering workshops.
Right.
It's super specific stuff, like how old the kids have to be and how much it costs.
Yep, and that's on purpose.
Yeah.
They want to make sure you're listening for details, not just skimming for the main idea.
Makes sense. Got to pay attention.
Yeah, and then as you move on, those details get even trickier. Like in section 2, you might have to listen to a whole company profile.
Oh, right.
Like they do with that Stevenson's manufacturing company.
Yeah.
And they'll throw in all this industry-specific lingo like automotive industry.
Uh-huh.
So if you don't know those terms, you're kind of stuck.
Vocabulary is definitely key then.
Absolutely. But it's not just about, like, cramming word lists. It's about targeted vocabulary building. You got to kind of anticipate what topics might pop up on the test and then go out and find real-world stuff to listen to about those things, like podcasts, documentaries, news articles.
So it's like building a vocabulary web.
Well, exactly. Connecting words and ideas, seeing how they work in real conversations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, I was reading an article that really stressed diversifying those listening sources.
All right.
Like, they recommended checking out TED Talks, The Guardian, BBC. They even said to listen to Australian and American news.
That's super smart, because the IELTS listening test, it includes different accents.
Oh, yeah, right.
Standard English ones, of course. But you'll hear British, Australian, American. So getting used to those different ways of speaking beforehand can be a lifesaver.
For sure. It's like anything. The more you experience it, the easier it becomes.
Absolutely.
But, okay, this same article, it also talked about those traps and distractors.
Ah, yes.
Like the things the test throws at you to kind of mess you up. What's the deal with those?
Well, they're not like evil tricks or anything, but they are designed to make you really pay attention to detail. Like, sometimes the speaker might say one thing and then later on correct themselves.
Oh, right. Like in that Cambridge guide where they talk about that surname that got misheard.
Exactly.
Mongan instead of Morn.
Classic example. Our brains kind of like to hear what they expect, or what sounds familiar. But on the IELTS, every single word, every syllable matters.
Gotcha. Can't let those sneaky sounds slip past.
Nope, you got to be on your toes. Yeah, you really got to train your ear to catch those little changes and corrections. It's like developing a sonic magnifying glass, zeroing in on the exact sounds and how they connect to what the speaker means.
Okay, I love that analogy, sonic magnifying glass. So how do we actually, like, sharpen those listening skills? Is it just more practice tests, or is there something else we can do?
I mean, practice tests are good, don't get me wrong, but to really become an expert listener, you got to engage with English in a way that's more immersive. Think about it. When you're watching a movie or listening to a podcast you love, you're way more engaged, right? You pick up on all sorts of things, like how the words are pronounced, the humor, the emotions behind the words.
That's so true. Like, when I'm hooked on a podcast, I'm literally hanging on every word trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
Exactly. And that's the kind of active listening we need to bring to the IELTS. When you're listening to those diverse sources we talked about, try to have that same level of engagement. Don't just let the sounds wash over you. Actively think about what they're saying, how they're saying it, and why it matters.
Okay, so approach it like a detective, looking for clues and piecing together the story.
Exactly. And one of the most valuable clues you can use is your understanding of grammar. Like, let's say you're doing a sentence completion task and you see a gap in the sentence. If the word before the gap is an, the missing word has got to be a singular noun that starts with a vowel sound.
It's like having a secret code to crack the test. I never thought of it that way.
It kind of is. And speaking of codes, one of the most surprising things we found in our research was the connection between getting a band 9 and, wait for it, Stoicism.
Stoicism, like
Mhm.
the ancient Greek philosophy. Okay, I gotta admit, that was not on my IELTS bingo card.
Right. Seems kind of random, I know, but there's actually a lot of wisdom in Stoicism that can be applied to the IELTS, especially the listening section.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does ancient philosophy tie into a modern English test?
Well, one of the big ideas in Stoicism is this idea of focusing on what you can control and accepting what you can't.
Okay, yeah.
So in terms of the IELTS, that means you prep really well beforehand. You learn the vocab, you practice active listening, you understand the test format, all that good stuff. But then when you're actually in the exam room, you got to let go of all those anxieties
Mhm.
and just focus on the task at hand.
So instead of freaking out about the pressure, I should channel my inner stoic and just zone in on the listening.
Exactly. It's like a mental game as much as a language test. It's
Yeah.
about finding that inner calm and knowing that you've put in the work, so trust yourself to do your best.
That's really helpful, actually. It takes some of the pressure off knowing that it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them.
Absolutely. Even the most experienced IELTS takers, they make mistakes. It's all about how you handle those challenges that really matters.
So even if I totally bomb a question or even a whole section, it's not the end of the world.
Not at all. The Stoics, they believe that setbacks happen. They're unavoidable.
Right.
But it's what we do with those experiences, how we learn and grow from them, that defines us.
Wow, that's actually super reassuring.
It is. And this brings us to another key principle of Stoicism, the idea of turning obstacles into opportunities. Think of the IELTS listening test not as this big, scary hurdle, but as a chance to show off your skills, to prove you've mastered the English language.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the appeal of this stoicism thing. It's like a mental toolkit for success, not just for the IELTS, but for life in general.
Exactly. It's all about perspective.
So true. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. From test structure to active listening, avoiding those sneaky traps, and even getting a little philosophical, it feels like we've unlocked a whole new level of IELTS prep. But I'm sure there's still more to uncover.
There always is. Let's take a sec to recap some of the key takeaways from today before we jump into the final stretch of our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about the structure of the test, active listening, all those little traps they throw in there, and even how, like, ancient philosophy can help us stay calm and focused. But let's get practical for a minute. What are some actual strategies for tackling those different types of questions? We were just starting to get into multiple choice questions before we took a break.
Oh, yeah, those can be tricky.
Yeah.
They really want to see if you can understand all those little shades of meaning.
Right, right. Because a lot of times it seems like the speakers touch on all the answer
They
choices.
do. They do. It's all about picking the one that truly matches what they're trying to say.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling for those wrong answers, those distractors, as they call them? It's easy to get thrown off when you hear a word and think, oh, I remember that from the passage.
Yeah, you got to be careful about jumping to conclusions. That's where that detective mindset we were talking about comes in. Remember those verbal cues. Listen for those little things that show whether the speakers agree or disagree. Like if one speaker throws out an idea and the other one's like, absolutely, or couldn't agree more, that's a good sign you're on the right track. But if you hear stuff like, well, not necessarily, or I see what you mean, but that might be a hint that they're coming at it from a different angle.
So it's not just what they say, but how they say it.
Exactly. Their tone, their emphasis, it can tell you just as much as the words themselves.
It's like reading between the lines, but with your ears.
That's a great way to put it. And okay, what about those matching tasks?
Oh, yeah, those. The ones where you got to link the statements to the right speaker.
Those can be a real pain, especially in section 3 when you've got like a whole group discussion going on.
Right, it's like eavesdropping on a conversation, and it's so easy to lose track of who said what.
Absolutely. That's where that mental map comes in super handy.
The one we talked about earlier.
Yep. Pay attention to anything the speakers say about like their role in the discussion, their background, their take on the topic, anything that helps you build a little picture of them in your mind.
So if one person mentions they're a historian who focuses on ancient Rome, and then someone else talks about their experience working as a museum curator, those are important clues to remember.
Exactly. Those little details help you keep everyone straight so you don't mix up their statements. You're basically creating a mini profile for each speaker in your head.
That's a really cool way to think about it. And what if we do get lost? Like if we miss something or just totally blank on a question, is it okay to just guess.
Absolutely. Better to put down an answer than leave it blank. Remember, on the IELTS listening, they don't take off points for wrong answers. So use your best judgment. Think about what you did here, those mental profiles you created, any little hints you picked up, and make an educated guess.
Okay, good to know. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from how the test is structured to active listening, all those tricky traps and distractors, the different question types, even a little ancient philosophy. What's the big takeaway for our listeners who are really going for that band 9?
I think the biggest takeaway is that getting a band 9 isn't about memorizing a bunch of vocabulary or just learning test-taking tricks. It's about truly appreciating the English language and being curious about the world. At its heart, the IELTS listening test is really testing how well you can understand spoken English in different situations.
So keep listening, keep learning, keep exploring. And maybe one day you'll be sharing your own Band 9 success story.
I love it. And remember, just like those Stoics, turn those obstacles into opportunities. See the IELTS listening test not as some big scary thing, but as a chance to show off your skills. A chance to prove you've mastered the English language and open up a whole world of possibilities.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for our deep dive into the IELTS listening test. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this helpful. Until next time, happy listening.